April 6, 1945. Off Okinawa, East China Sea. Dawn breaks. Over Task Force 58 of the United States Fifth Fleet. On radar picket destroyers. Positioned 16 miles from the main fleet, sailors scan the horizon, knowing what approaches. In the combat information center of USS Lee, radar operators track incoming contacts, not dozens but hundreds. The ship's 5-inch gun cruise load shells marked with cryptic VT designations, each containing miniaturized radio transmitters that would revolutionize naval warfare. The goal is desperate. Survive Operation Kikusui Number 1, the first of 10. Massive coordinated kamikaze attacks. At 0600 hours, the sky fills with aircraft. Through the morning haze comes a sound that will define the Battle of Okinawa. The drone of hundreds of Japanese aircraft engines approaching in waves. Pilots sealed in cockpits with no intention of returning. Leading the assault are pilots of the Imperial Japanese Navy's Special Attack Units. Their Zero fighters in Yokosuka D, 4 Igidi dive bombers laden with 250 kilograms. Bombs followed by waves of older aircraft pressed into suicide service. Among them, specially trained Ochre pilots sit sealed in rocket-powered flying bombs carried by Mitsubishi G-4MB. Betty bombers. What happens next will demonstrate the revolutionary impact of American proximity, fuse technology, and reveal why Japanese kamikaze tactics, initially so devastating, would ultimately fail against the most sophisticated anti-aircraft system ever deployed. The American VT proximity fuse had arrived in the Pacific Theater after 2 years of combat testing that began with a single historic shot. Developed through a crash program initiated in 1940 by Section T of the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory under Dr. Merle Tuve. The proximity fuse represented one of the 3 most critical secret projects of World War II alongside radar and the atomic bomb. The fuse operated on a brilliantly simple principle, a miniature radio transmitter receiver that would send out continuous radio waves and measure their return frequency. When the Doppler shift indicated proximity to a target, the fuse would detonate the shell automatically. No longer would gunners need to estimate exact distances and set mechanical timers. The shell would know when to explode. The technical challenges had been staggering. The fuse's components, including tiny glass vacuum tubes manufactured by Sylvania, had to withstand acceleration forces of 20,000 times gravity when fired from a 5-inch gun. The projectile would reach 2,600 foot-pers while spinning at 25,000 revolutions per minute through the gun's rifling. Every component had to function perfectly after this violent launch, then operate reliably in temperatures ranging from 100 degrees to -50 F. By April 1945, American factories had produced over 15 million proximity fuses for naval use in the Pacific Theater. Manufacturing had been distributed across multiple contractors. Crosley Corporation alone produced 525 913 fuse, 24% of the total. RCA, Eastman, Kodak, General Electric, and McQueen Norris combined with 87 different firms, using 110 factories engaged in various phases of production. This massive industrial effort ensured that American forces at Okinawa were equipped with the most advanced anti-aircraft ammunition ever created. The United States Navy had increased proximity fuse allocation from 25% of anti-aircraft ammunition in 1943 to 75% by 1945. This represented recognition that Pacific Theater combat against kamikaze attacks demanded revolutionary defensive capabilities. Every destroyer, cruiser, and battleship carried thousands of V-fused 5-inch shells as their primary defense against suicide attacks. Standing in stark contrast was the Japanese kamikaze program born of desperation. Following catastrophic defeats in the Marianas and the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Japan had lost the majority of its experienced pilots and aircraft carriers. Vice Admiral Takajiro Onishi, commander of the 1st Air Fleet, had proposed the formation of special attack units in October 1944, arguing that conventional tactics could no longer succeed against overwhelming American firepower. The Kamikaze represented Japan's attempt to transform its remaining inexperienced pilots into precision-guided weapons. The mathematics seemed favorable. While conventional attacks achieved hit rates of only 2% against heavily defended American ships, early kamikaze attacks in the Philippines had achieved success rates exceeding 34%. A single pilot in a Zero fighter, carrying a 250 kilograms bomb, could potentially sink or a destroyer, trading one life and one obsolete aircraft for hundreds of American casualties and millions of dollars in damaged warships. The kamikaze pilots underwent abbreviated training that emphasized spiritual preparation over flying skills. Many had less than 100 hours of flight time compared to the 500-plus hours of their predecessors at Pearl Harbor. They were taught basic navigation, ship recognition, and most critically, the final diving approach that would evade anti-aircraft fire. The pilots wrote final letters, participated in ceremonial sake toasts, and received samurai swords or rising sun headbands before their missions. But no amount of spiritual preparation could overcome the technological revolution they were about to encounter. The ochre suicide weapon represented the ultimate expression of the kamikaze concept. Nicknamed Baka Fool by American sailors, this piloted bomb carried a 1,200 kilograms warhead powered by 3 solid-fuel rocket motors. With a maximum speed of 575 miles per hour in terminal dive, it was designed to be unstoppable once released. Yet its fatal weakness was range, barely 10 miles, requiring vulnerable Betty bombers to carry them directly into the teeth of American defenses. The contrast in defensive philosophy was absolute. American ships at Okinawa deployed in concentric rings of protection with radar picket destroyers positioned to provide early warning and bear the brunt of initial attacks. Each destroyer carried 12 to 16 5-inch guns capable of firing V-fused shells, creating overlapping fields of fire. The proximity fuse transformed these weapons from area denial systems into precision instruments. A 5-inch VT shell had a lethal burst radius of 70 feet compared to just 20 feet for time-fused shells. More critically, the fuse eliminated the complex calculations required for conventional anti-aircraft fire, allowing gunners to engage targets immediately upon detection. The morning of April 6, 1945 would put these systems to their ultimate test. Operation Kikosui No. 1 involved 391 Navy planes and 133 Army planes of which 215 Navy planes and 82 Army planes were kamikazes. A total of 297 suicide aircraft in a single coordinated assault. Commander Frederick Julian Bektonov, USS Laffey, later described the approaching kamikaze waves as resembling a swarm of bees heading for the only flower in the desert. The first wave struck at 0600 with radar operators tracking over 50 aircraft approaching from the north. The picket destroyers opened fire at maximum range, 12,000 yards with V-fused shells. The proximity fuses proved devastatingly effective against the approaching formations. Each shell that passed within lethal range of an aircraft automatically detonated, filling the sky with steel fragments. Unlike time-fused shells that required precise range estimation, the VD fuses turned near misses into kills. Within minutes, dozens of Japanese aircraft were falling into the sea. Their suicide missions ended miles from their targets. But the kamikazes kept coming. At 0744, USS Leif came under concentrated attack by 22 aircraft in 80 minutes. The destroyer's gunners fired 345 rounds of 5-inch VT ammunition, destroying 9 attackers outright. The proximity fuses allowed Leif's guns to engage multiple targets simultaneously, switching rapidly between aircraft without the delays required for fuse setting. When kamikaze pilots attempted their standard tactic of approaching at wavetop height to avoid radar detection, the VT fuses proved equally effective, detonating when the shells passed close to the sea surface and creating walls of fragments that shredded low-flying aircraft. Despite this devastating defensive fire, Laffy was struck by 6 kamikazes and 4 bombs. It survived. A testament to both American damage control and the fact that proximity fuses had prevented many more attackers from reaching their target. The effectiveness of the VT fuse was no accident. The technology had been secretly tested in combat since January 5, 1943, when USS Helena fired the first proximity fused shells in action off Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Red Cochran, commanding the aft 5 inches battery, shot down a Japanese ICD-3A Valdive bomber with the second of 3 salvos. The shells had detonated without direct hits. They had simply passed close enough to trigger the fuse and tear the aircraft apart with fragments. This single success validated 3 years of intensive development that had overcome seemingly insurmountable technical challenges. The fuse contained approximately 130 electronic components, miniaturized to fit in a space smaller than a pint milk bottle, all manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandth of an inch. By the Okinawa campaign, post-battle analysis revealed the mathematical superiority of proximity-fused ammunition. Time-fused 5 inches shells required an average of 1,162 rounds to destroy each kamikaze. VT-fused shells reduced this to 310 rounds per kill, a nearly 4-fold improvement in effectiveness. In optimal conditions, the results were even more dramatic. The destroyer escort USS Abercrombie destroyed a kamikaze with just 2 VD rounds in May 1945. The destroyer USS Morrison, defending against a massive kamikaze attack on May 4th, shot down 8 attackers in minutes using proximity-fused ammunition before being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The psychological impact of the proximity fuse on Japanese pilots was profound. Surviving kamikaze pilots who aborted their missions reported the terrifying experience of approaching American task forces through seemingly solid walls of exploding shells. The distinctive black puffs of VT explosions appeared with uncanny accuracy, as if the American gunners could see exactly where each aircraft would be. Japanese tactical doctrine had assumed that high-speed, low-altitude approaches would minimize exposure to anti-aircraft fire. The proximity fuse invalidated these assumptions entirely. Shells that would have missed by 50 feet with conventional fuses now detonated lethally close, turning the final approach into a gauntlet of precisely timed explosions. Vice Admiral Matti Agaki, directing kamikaze operations from Kyushu, noted in his diary the increasingly devastating effectiveness of American anti-aircraft defenses. By late April 1945, Japanese naval intelligence estimated that fewer than 1 in 4 kamikaze aircraft were reaching their targets compared to 1 in 3 during the Philippines campaign. The difference was primarily attributed to what Japanese reports described as new type anti-aircraft shells that seemed to explode with impossible accuracy. UGI wrote, "The enemy's defensive firepower has increased remarkably. Our special attack aircraft are being destroyed at distances we previously considered safe." Individual American sailors operating the 5 inches guns with VT ammunition became legends within their task forces on the destroyer USS Hugh W. Hadley. During the May 11th attack, gun crews claimed 17 confirmed kamikaze kills. Using proximity-fused ammunition, the gunners developed a technique of leading kamikaze aircraft with continuous fire, creating a wall of VT that attacking aircraft had to fly through. Their gun crews could fire 15 rounds per minute, each shell equipped with its own electronic brain seeking targets. During one 52-minute period, Hugh W. Hadley's guns destroyed multiple kamikazes in succession, with the proximity fuses ensuring that even shells passing above or below the rapidly maneuvering aircraft would detonate effectively. The story of USS Aaron Ward during the May 3rd attacks illustrates the proximity fuse's role as a force multiplier. When 40 kamikaze aircraft attacked the destroyer, her 5 inches batteries fired continuously for 52 minutes. The VT fuse shells destroyed 6 attackers completely and damaged 5 others severely enough that they crashed into the sea. Commander William Saunders, later testified that without proximity fuses, his ship would have been overwhelmed in the first 10 minutes. The ability to engage targets without precise range of finding allowed Aaron Ward's guns to shift rapidly between multiple threats, something impossible with time-fused ammunition. These accounts were multiplied across the entire fleet. During the 10 major Kamikaze operations from April 6 to June 22, 1945, Japanese forces launched approximately 1,900 aircraft in organized kamikaze attacks. American naval forces, primarily using VT-fused 5-inch shells, destroyed hundreds of these attackers before they could reach their targets. Statistics from the operations. Research group showed that ships equipped with proximity-fused ammunition were 3 times more likely to survive concentrated kamikaze attacks than those relying primarily on conventional ammunition. The proximity fuse had transformed what should have been a catastrophic tactical innovation into a costly but manageable threat. The disparity in technological adaptation became apparent as the campaign progressed. American forces continuously refined their proximity fuse tactics, discovering that VT shells were particularly effective when fired in patterns that created overlapping spheres of fragments. Ships began coordinating their fire to create these VT boxes through which kamikaze aircraft had to fly. The Japanese, meanwhile, could only respond with tactical variations, dawn attacks, multi-axis approaches, mixing conventional and suicide aircraft, none of which could overcome the fundamental advantage of shells that knew when to explode. The production statistics told the story of industrial warfare at its apex. By June 1945, American factories were producing 70,000 proximity fuses per day. The entire war effort would see over 22 million proximity fuses manufactured at a cost exceeding $1 billion in 1940s currency, roughly $15 billion in today's dollars. The Crossley Corporation alone employed 10,000 workers across 3 shifts, 7 days a week. Each fuse cost had dropped from $732 in 1942 to just $18 by 1945 through mass production efficiencies. This massive investment proved worthwhile when Navy analysis indicated that proximity fuses prevented the loss of dozens of ships during the Okinawa campaign alone. Japanese industrial capacity, devastated by strategic bombing and resource shortages, could produce nothing comparable. While Japanese scientists had understood the proximity fuse concept, German reports on Allied special ammunition had reached Japan via submarine. They lacked the industrial infrastructure to develop and mass-produce such sophisticated devices. The vacuum tube technology alone required precision manufacturing capabilities that Japan's war-ravaged industry could not achieve. Japanese radar development critical for understanding proximity fuse principles remained primitive compared to American systems. The Type 22 radar, Japan's most advanced naval set, operated at wavelengths that made miniaturization impossible even if manufacturing capacity had existed. The effectiveness of the proximity fuse influenced Japanese tactical doctrine in the campaign's final stages. By May 1945, kamikaze pilots were instructed to approach American task forces at maximum altitude before diving vertically onto targets, hoping to minimize exposure to VT-fused anti-aircraft fire. This tactical adjustment, while reducing losses during approach, made accurate targeting nearly impossible. Ships could maneuver out of the dive path, and the high-altitude approach gave radar operators more time to track incoming aircraft. The attempted solution proved counterproductive. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, commander of amphibious forces at Okinawa, credited proximity fuses with making the invasion possible. In a letter to the Chief of Naval Operations, Turner wrote, "Without the VT fuse, our losses from suicide attacks would have been unbearable. The Japanese kamikaze was a formidable weapon that could have changed the outcome of the Pacific War if not for our technological superiority in anti-aircraft defense." His assessment was echoed by Admiral Mark Mitcher, whose flagship USS Bunker Hill survived a devastating kamikaze strike on May 11th, partly because proximity Fused fire destroyed 3 other attackers that would have finished the crippled carrier. Admiral Arleigh Burke, Mitch's chief of staff, later recalled the effectiveness of proximity fuses during a 1978 interview. When I went as chief of staff to Admiral Mitcher, who commanded the fast carrier task forces, all the 5 inches 38 and 5 inches 25 ammunition was fitted with VT fuses. And as you well know, those fuses knocked down enemy planes by the dozens. Had it not been for those fuses, our ship losses and casualties in the fast carriers in the last half of the war would have been enormously larger. The proximity fuse's impact extended beyond mere statistics. The technology fundamentally altered the morale equation that made kamikaze tactics viable. Japanese military doctrine assumed that the certainty of death for their pilots would be balanced by the near certainty of hitting enemy ships. When success rates dropped below 20% due to proximity fuse defenses, the exchange became unsustainable even by the brutal calculus of suicide warfare. Young Japanese pilots, many of them university students drafted into the special attack units, began to understand that their deaths would likely achieve nothing. Letters recovered after the war revealed growing awareness among kamikaze pilots that American defenses had evolved beyond what their commanders had promised. Lieutenant Yukioki, leader of the first official kamikaze unit in October 1944, had achieved devastating success against escort carriers in Lee Gulf when proximity fuses comprised only 25% of anti-aircraft ammunition. By Okinawa, his successors faced a fundamentally different reality. Lieutenant Commander Goro Nanaka, leading the Thunder Gods Corps, equipped with Ochre flying bombs, lost his entire squadron on March 21, 1945, without a single Ochre reaching launch position. American fighters, guided by radar, intercept officers shot down all 18 Betty bombers. But even if they had broken through the wall of VTF fused, anti-aircraft fire would have been impenetrable. The technical sophistication of the proximity fuse represented more than just superior manufacturing. The device embodied fundamental advances in electronics, material science, and systems integration that Japan could not match. The miniaturized vacuum tubes manufactured by Sylvania and Raytheon used special glass formulations that could withstand tremendous shock. The battery system, activated by the acceleration of firing, used an electrolyte that remained stable for months, then activated instantly when needed. The radio frequency was precisely calculated to minimize interference while maximizing detection range. Each element represented years of focused research backed by unlimited funding. Meanwhile, Japanese anti-aircraft defenses remained primitive. The Type 98 100mm anti-aircraft gun, Japan's best heavy AA weapon, still relied on mechanical time fuses that required manual setting before each shot. Japanese naval vessels at Okinawa, including the super battleship Yamato, during her final sortie, carried anti-aircraft ammunition that was technologically equivalent to what Americans had used at Pearl Harbor, when Yamato faced over 300 American aircraft. On April 7, 1945, her 162 anti-aircraft guns fired thousands of rounds, but shot down fewer than 10 attackers. The Americans lost just 10 aircraft, while sinking the world's largest battleship, a stark demonstration of technological disparity. The proximity fuse also enabled new tactical innovations impossible with conventional ammunition. American destroyers developed the VT umbrella technique, firing proximity fuse shells in predetermined patterns above friendly ships under attack. The shells would detonate at set distances, creating a protective dome of fragments that kamikaze aircraft had to penetrate. This technique proved particularly effective against the Ochre flying bombs, whose high speed made them nearly impossible to track with conventional fire control, but vulnerable to the wall of fragments created by VT patterns. During the entire Okinawa campaign from April 1st to June 22nd, 1945, the United States Navy expended approximately 150,000 proximity-fused 5-inch shells. The effectiveness was undeniable. While VT-fused ammunition represented 45% of heavy anti-aircraft ammunition fired. It accounted for the vast majority of confirmed kamikaze kills at longer ranges. Time-fused shells comprising 55% of ammunition expended proved effective primarily at close range, where accuracy was less critical. The mathematics demonstrated that proximity fuses were approximately 3 to 4 times more effective than conventional ammunition against kamikaze attacks. The human cost differential was equally dramatic. Ships that exhausted their VT ammunition and reverted to time-fused shell suffered casualty rates significantly higher during subsequent attacks. The destroyer USS Drexler attacked after expending her proximity-fused ammunition on May 28, was sunk in less than a minute by 2 kamikazes that would likely have been destroyed by VT fire. Her 158 dead represented more casualties than many destroyers suffered during entire campaigns. While equipped with adequate proximity-fused ammunition, Admiral Raymond Spruant, commander of the Fifth Fleet, experienced the kamikaze threat personally when his flagship USS Indianapolis was hit in March, forcing him to transfer to USS New Mexico, which was also struck in May. He later wrote, "This is my second experience with a suicide plane making a hit on board my own ship, and I have seen 4 other ships hit near me." The suicide plane is a very effective weapon, which we must not underestimate. Yet, Spruant also recognized that, without proximity fuses, the kamikaze would have been far more devastating. The VT fuse has saved countless ships and lives. It is the margin between bearable and unbearable losses. The strategic implications were clear to military planners preparing for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan. Intelligence estimates indicated that Japan had reserved approximately 10,000 aircraft for kamikaze attacks against the invasion fleet. However, American warplanners, confident in proximity fuse effectiveness, calculated that defensive requirements could be met. Production of VT fuses was scheduled to reach 100,000 units daily by September 1945. New Mark 53 and Mark 58 fuses with improved sensitivity and reliability were entering mass production. The invasion fleet would have carried over 1 million proximity fuse shells, creating an anti-aircraft defense unprecedented in military history. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 ended the war before this climactic test could occur. But the proximity fuse's impact on Japanese surrender calculations should not be underestimated. Japanese military assessments captured after the war acknowledged the impossibility of successful defense against an invasion fleet protected by what they called electronic shells. Admiral Sumu Toyota, chief of the Naval General Staff, testified after the war that the Japanese Navy had calculated homeland defense kamikaze attacks would achieve less than 10% success rates against proximity fused defenses, a rate that would make the tactic militarily worthless. Post-war analysis revealed the full scope of the proximity fuse achievement. The program had mobilized 112 companies in addition to the main contractors, creating an industrial ecosystem dedicated to producing the most sophisticated military electronics of the era. British scientists who had conceived the original proximity fuse concept in 1940, but lacked resources for development, acknowledged that American industrial capability had achieved what they considered impossible. The British had concluded that making vacuum tubes survive gun launch was insurmountable. American engineers proved them wrong. The effectiveness of the proximity fuse against kamikaze attacks influenced military technology development for decades. The principle of smart munitions, weapons that could think for themselves, became central to American military doctrine. Modern anti-aircraft missiles use proximity fusing descended from the VT fuse, while the phalanx close-in weapon system protecting today's warships operates on principles pioneered during the defense against kamikazes, the technological superiority that defeated human guidance with electronic intelligence established a paradigm that continues to shape military strategy. Japanese veterans interviewed after the war expressed continued amazement at American proximity fuse technology. Commander Tadashi Nakajima, who helped establish the Kamikaze program, admitted, "We knew the Americans had superior technology, but the proximity fuse was beyond our imagination. Our pilots reported shells exploding exactly where they flew, as if guided by invisible hands. It destroyed not just our aircraft, but the fundamental premise of the special attack that spiritual power could overcome material disadvantage." Captain Ichiro Gio, an early advocate of kamikaze tactics, survived the war and later reflected on the proximity fuse's impact. "We believe that the willingness to die would guarantee success. The American electronic fuse proved that technology could defeat even the most determined human sacrifice. It was not just a weapon, but a statement about the nature of modern warfare." The contrast between the proximity fuse and kamikaze attacks represented fundamentally different philosophies about the value of human life and the role of technology in warfare. The American investment in preserving life through superior technology stood against the Japanese willingness to expend life as a weapon itself. The proximity fuse, by making kamikaze attacks survivable for American forces, invalidated the cruel logic that drove young Japanese men to deliberate death. In this sense, the electronic fuse represented not just technological superiority, but a moral statement about how war should be fought. The legacy of the proximity fuse in defeating kamikaze attacks extends beyond military history. The crash development program that created the VEET fuse established the model for subsequent American technical achievements, from the space program to modern computing. The collaboration between universities, private industry, and military requirements that produced 22 million sophisticated electronic devices under wartime pressure demonstrated American organizational capabilities that would define the post-war era. The Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, where the proximity fuse was perfected, continued as a center of military technology, innovation, developing everything from guided missiles to satellite navigation. Dr. Merle Tuve, who led the proximity fuse development, later reflected on the achievement. "We saved lives by making weapons more effective. Every kamikaze shot down by a proximity fuse meant American sailors who went home to their families that was worth any amount of effort and expense." His team's success validated the American approach of applying scientific knowledge to military problems, a philosophy that would dominate defense strategy throughout the Cold War. For the Japanese, the failure of kamikaze tactics against proximity fuse defenses marked the end of beliefs about spiritual superiority, overcoming material disadvantage. The young pilots who died in futile attacks against walls of VEET-fused explosions became symbols not of noble sacrifice, but of military leadership that had failed to recognize technological reality. Modern Japan's emphasis on technological development and innovation can be traced partly to the harsh lessons of 1945, when electronic fuses defeated human pilots with mechanical precision. The mathematical precision of the proximity fuse's success, 310 rounds per kill versus 1,162. 4-time fuse shells translated into saved ships, preserved lives, and ultimately strategic victory. Each VT fuse that functioned correctly meant an American sailor who returned home, a ship that survived to fight another day, and proof that technology could provide decisive advantage in modern warfare. The confirmed destruction of hundreds of kamikaze aircraft by proximity fuses before reaching their targets represented thousands of American casualties, prevented dozens of ships saved, and validation of the billion-dollar investment in electronic warfare. The story of technology defeating fatalism reached its climax in the waters of Okinawa, where radar-guided fighters, proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells, and sophisticated damage control systems prevailed against deliberate suicide attacks. The kamikaze pilots, brave young men sacrificed to a lost cause, flew into an electronic killing field their commanders never anticipated. Their deaths, while achieving tactical damage that horrified American sailors, failed to achieve the strategic goal of making invasion costs unbearable. The Proximity fuse had transformed their sacrifice from devastating weapon to manageable threat. Secretary of the Navy James Forstall summarized the proximity fuse's contribution. The proximity fuse has helped blaze the trail to Japan. Without the protection, this ingenious device has given the surface ships of the fleet. Our westward push could not have been so swift, and the cost in men and ships would have been immeasurably greater. This assessment, shared by military leaders throughout the Pacific theater, recognized that electronic intelligence had defeated human sacrifice. The final accounting was sobering yet decisive. During the entire Okinawa campaign, Japanese kamikaze attacks sank 36 American ships and damaged 368 others. Terrible as these losses were, they represented survival of the vast majority of ships attacked, a rate that would have been impossible without proximity fuses. The 497 American sailors killed by kamikazes at Okinawa while representing the Navy's bloodiest battle were a fraction of casualties that conventional analysis predicted without VT technology. Japanese losses were absolute. Approximately 1,900 aircraft and pilots expended in organized kamikaze attacks during the 10 Kikosui operations, plus hundreds more in improvised suicide attempts, achieving tactical results that fell far short of strategic requirements. The proximity fuse's victory over kamikaze attacks demonstrated that in modern warfare, technological superiority could overcome advantages in numbers, determination, or even willingness to die. The American sailors manning 5-inch guns with VT ammunition held decisive advantage over Japanese pilots sealed in cockpits for one-way missions. The miniaturized radio transmitter in each shell nose represented industrial capacity, scientific knowledge, and organizational capability that no amount of martial spirit could match. When the electronic fuse met the human pilot in the skies over Okinawa, the outcome was predetermined by factories in Cincinnati, laboratories in Maryland, and the fundamental American belief that technology could preserve life while achieving victory. The mathematical reality was inescapable. A proximity fuse weighing less than 5 pounds, containing 130 electronic components, manufactured for $18 by 1945 and functioning for less than 30 seconds, could destroy a kamikaze aircraft with its pilot, representing years of training, tons of aluminum and steel, and most tragically, a human life that could never be replaced. When multiplied across thousands of engagements throughout the Pacific theater, this equation translated into American victory through technological superiority that helped determine the war's outcome. The proximity fuse's success against kamikaze attacks validated the entire American approach to warfare in the 20th century. Investment in technology, faith in industrial production, and belief that superior equipment could overcome fanatical determination proved correct in the most extreme test imaginable. For Japan, the failure of the kamikaze against proximity fuse defenses represented not just military defeat, but invalidation of core beliefs about spirit triumphing over matter. The electronic fuse had defeated the divine wind, proving that in the crucible of modern warfare, advanced technology would triumph over human sacrifice. The Pacific War demonstrated that in modern naval warfare, the ability to destroy aircraft at distance determined survival. Nations that could design, produce, and deploy superior defensive technology held decisive advantages over those relying on human courage alone. The proximity fuse versus kamikaze comparison illustrates this principle at the most fundamental level. American electronic sophistication defeating Japanese human sacrifice. The VT fuse's success at Okinawa established technological superiority as the determining factor in military effectiveness. The contrast between American and Japanese approaches to anti-aircraft defense ultimately tells a larger story about industrial warfare in the 20th century. Nations that could marshal scientific knowledge, manufacturing capability, and organizational expertise to produce superior military technology held insurmountable advantages. The proximity fuse represented the culmination of American strengths. innovative engineering, mass production, and systematic problem-solving applied to military challenges. Its triumph over the kamikaze demonstrated conclusively that in modern war, victory belonged to those who could think, build, and deploy better. Technology. The mathematical precision of the proximity fuse's effectiveness. 3 to 4 times more effective than conventional ammunition, reducing required rounds per kill by 73%, preventing the loss of countless ships, translated into strategic victory that preserved American lives while defeating a determined enemy. This differential multiplied across the vast Pacific theater helped secure American victory and establish technological superiority as the foundation of post-war military doctrine. The electronic fuse had not just defeated the kamikaze, it had validated the entire American approach to warfare. Through superior technology, proving definitively that in matters of life and death, quality of equipment could overcome quantity of sacrifice.